And now we're going to introduce today's speaker. Tony Kissel co-authored a baseball book, won an award from the Cortland Cultural Council for a story on John McGraw, which reminds me, when we close that door and on your way out, check out John J. McGraw's uniform. It is on display. And you're going to learn more about him today. And has an essay and a book coming out next year through McFarland Publishing Company. He also has a book that's here today and available for sale. It would make a great Christmas present for baseball fans. So, Tony.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. I wasn't sure with the weather earlier in the week if anyone would be here and what the driving would be like. Plus, it's the day before Thanksgiving, so I'm sure everybody should be. And after, hopefully, after this, I'll give you enough energy to go out there and shop and get ready for the two holidays coming up. I've been researching Cortland County baseball for about 25, 30 years. I first started at the Cortland Free Library when I found out Cortland had a minor league baseball team called the Cortland Wagon Makers. They were around for 5 years, and then they tried another minor league team and also called them the Cortland Wagon Makers. Cortland was the wagon making capital of the East Coast. They had numerous companies that all they did was wagons and sleds this time of the year. So, yeah, to me that was fascinating because other than Jerry Dexter, I don't think anyone else in town knew that there was a minor league team. So, I guess the best way to start right now to tell you about baseball from 100 years ago and how popular it was and how important Cortland was to baseball would be you could just maybe close your eyes real quick, blink, and pretend we're back in the year 1889. It's summertime. There's a 14-year-old boy playing for the Cortland YMCA. He's their star pitcher, star hitter. He's going to go on to become famous. There's a 16-year-old boy in Truxton, which everyone has heard of. He was the pitcher for his team. He was the captain of the team. He's only 16. He was the manager of the team, only 16, and he was the general manager of the team. Okay, so you have these two famous people, and then you also have a 19-year-old who came from out of town. He was like the hired gun. The Cortland Independent semi-pro team hired this pitcher, and they paid him every month. He was the only player on the team that was paid every month, and all he did was pitch maybe every other week. So he pitched maybe 5 or 10 games that summer. He would go on to be famous. And what they all have together that one year, besides pitching in Cortland, was they all ended up playing in the major leagues. Not together, but I found that kind of fascinating that Cortland at the time had 3 different young pitchers who went on to make the major leagues. That's how good the ball playing was around here. The 14-year-old, his name was Fred Ketchum. The 16-year-old, his name was John McGraw. And then the 19-year-old, his name was Jack Sharon. He later wrote crazy songs, strange titles and stuff. There were a lot of baseball-related activities. There was a county championship. The top team would either win a bat or a ball. Factory teams, every factory in Cortland had a baseball team. And on the weekends, one factory team would play another factory team, usually sponsored by the owners of the factory. There was a great semi-pro team called the Cortland Independents that played here. And women were also included in baseball back then. When the minor league team had games, there was often a ladies' day. The ladies were allowed to be admitted for free, and it was thought, why don't we admit ladies free? That way the father and the mother will go and the children will go. We'll get them all in, we'll charge less admission for the children. And some of the attendances for the minor league games were as many as 2,000 people would pay to watch the game. I've only picked 12 baseball players. I could very easily have picked 50. I could have picked Duke Erickson, I could have picked Ira Dexter, I could have picked several of the Homer Braves, other players who were on a team called the Cortland Wagon Makers. There were, I think at one point I lost track, but I think there's 21 players that played minor league ball here that ended up playing Major League Baseball. So it was it was the most popular outdoor activity, recreational activity in Cortland County in the summer. That's how big it was. And the first person that I will start off with would be, I'm going to start off with probably the shortest player, and that's John J. McGraw. This is his picture in 1890 with Olean, and you can see the look of determination on his face already. The manager, Bert Kenny, was also from Truxton, sort of like an older brother to him. He signed John J. McGraw. McGraw wanted to be a pitcher, but he wasn't good enough for some of the other pitchers, so he ended up playing third base. But what's interesting about him is that all the biographies on John J. McGraw have numerous mistakes in them. The ancestor of John J. McGraw, Michael McGraw, has done a lot online, and he's kind of helped me a little bit. But there's 3 or 4 different biographies that say that there was a diphtheria epidemic in the winter, when actually it was during the summer. But in the summer of 1883, he was 10 years old. His mother had just given birth to their 8th child in the family. She died within a month. Right after that, John McGraw lost one of his brothers and 2 of his sisters. So he lost his mother, brother, and 2 sisters at the age of 10. The family was in quarantine. Nobody was allowed to go up there. They stayed away from him because everyone was afraid of catching it. Nobody really knew why the mother died. It was, they think it may have something to do childbirth related. So he ended up eventually arguing with his dad and kind of living on his own. He lived with a family called the Goddards. Mary Goddard took him in with, she had a lot of sons, and they sort of became like his brothers. He got a job as a candy butcher on the Elmira, Cortland, and Northern Railroad. He would ride the railroad from Truxton to Elmira. Bert Kenny was playing on the Elmira, and he would let John, at the age of 14 or 15, work out with the minor league team. So that was good for him, plus he made money as a candy butcher. Sold everything on the train. Then when we get to the year 1889, he's 16 years old. This is a year before here. He's the manager and the star pitcher and the captain of the Truxton Grays. He's so good against East Homer that East Homer steals him from Truxton, pays him $5 a game. Now he's pitching for East Homer against Truxton and other towns. East Homer then plays Homer. If you know where Homer Academy or Cortland Academy was, where the Homer Elementary is now, East Homer played Homer. John McGraw was the pitcher for East Homer. They lost the game. Homer was a much better team, but he kept it competitive. He also played for teams called the Cortland Shamrocks, Fabius, and then in September he played for the Truxton High School team. I'm sure he probably had to have been the star. Some of the quotes, I hope to write a small booklet and make it available for purchase. It's going to be all about his time in Cortland County, nothing to do with the major leagues. Here's one here. The truth is only 3 balls got outside of the diamond except one thrown out while Truxton was at the bat, and while worthy Captain Jack, which is him, who was doing so much for the Truxton team, fanned out every time when at the bat, save once, where George Peace took pity on him and gave him a tossed ball. The truth from an official scorebook was just this and nothing more. The captain had dug up an umpire from somewhere, a good meek-faced sort of fellow who wanted to be fair but didn't dare. And Truxton's captain tried very hard 6 times to run the 6 men whom George Peace let go to first base home on foul balls. So he was making up rules as he was going along because he was the only one in town that had a rule book. And Jack called his men together, and after this consultation they went to the bat and succeeded in making one score. When the rain came and the way the Truxton 9 went for the barns was a caution, they never came back. Mr. Editor, we are of the opinion they won't come back. And here they played what might have been a very interesting game had it not been for the pitcher of the East Homer 9, which is him, who marked every decision of the umpire by some of the most vigorous kicking ever done by an ex-member of the Oneidas. So you can see at the age of 16, he's already got that reputation as a hard-nosed manager, umpire baiter. He's had that streak, and that kind of served him well for the rest of his life. So he went on to become a Hall of Fame player and manager, one of the greatest managers. He also didn't forget Cortland. He came back in the year 1913 in the middle of a pennant race with the New York Giants. Bert Kenny picked him up in Syracuse. They drove down here. 300 people were waiting outside a bar called the Criterion Cafe just to talk to him, shake his hand, and see him, because it was the middle of a pennant race. But he never forgot his roots here in Cortland. Okay, so now we switch to another guy. This gentleman was around about the same time as John J. McGraw. Everyone's heard of McGraw, nobody's heard of Fred Ketchum. He was from Elmira. His dad was an alderman in the city of Cortland, and he's the guy that was with the YMCA. He went to the normal school, played ball there. He played for the Cortland Wagon Makers. He was like the local boy on the team. And he started in 1897. He didn't even have a pair of cleats. They had the editor or the writer of the Cortland Standard said he should go buy himself a pair of cleats so he stopped swallowing all over himself, which I thought was kind of interesting. By the year 1899, he's good enough to go from Cortland, get on a train, and go and play Major League Baseball for Louisville. One of his teammates was Honus Wagner in the outfield, so he was competing with a Hall of Famer in the outfield at the time. He made the cover of the Sporting News in 1900 because they felt he was an up-and-coming star. But what happened was Louisville had to get rid of a lot of their players because the major leagues were reducing teams from 12 to 8. So what they did was Louisville and Pittsburgh kind of joined and became one team. He got cut. He went back to the minors. He was leading his league in hitting, and the team disbanded. The next year, Connie Mack signed him. He played for Philadelphia for a while. He made a few mistakes. He got dropped. So then he played out in the Western League for several years. So what he would do is he would train at the Hotel Cortland in the spring. He would work out. He had weights and stuff in his room. And then when spring training came, he would get on a train and he'd go out to the Western League. So he made the cover of the Sporting News, which is like making the cover of the New York Times. So that's pretty significant that that would happen back then. And then in 1908, he's working out in the Hotel Cortland with a friend. He says to his friend, "I'm kind of tired, I'm just going to lay down for now." So his friend leaves, his friend comes back, and Fred Ketchum had a heart attack and passed away. Okay. So there was a huge funeral in Cortland. He's buried in Cortland Rural Cemetery. His family stayed here, and that got him on the cover of the Sporting News one more time when they mentioned that he had passed away. And another paper had mentioned that the sad intelligence of the death of him, and his demise leaves a gap in the outfield which would be hard to fill. So there is a fellow that didn't quite become famous and successful, but he was a very good player. The next player, this is kind of a fun story about this guy because it just shows you how a tragic beginning can turn out to a happy ending. I'm surprised to make a great movie if you like happy endings. His name was Charles Townsend. He was a first baseman on the minor league Cortland Wagon Makers and a Cortland patrolman in 1900. He was one of the first patrolmen for Cortland. He was 6 feet tall. I think he weighed 200 pounds. And the Cortland Standard mentioned that there were instances where Cy Townsend's chasing robbers and criminals down Main Street, catching them and arresting them. I just thought that was kind of funny, but he married a local girl. His name was Townsend. He married Mabel Townsend in Cortland. So a Townsend married a Townsend, as Marianne, Anita Wright told me here once when we found that out. They had a child. The child at the age of 1 swallowed a safety pin And they rushed the child to the hospital, and the child passed away. So he's trying to play the baseball season, and his daughter just passed away. He somehow had one of his best seasons in Cortland, but that was his last year here. The family, he ended up leaving his family, ended up playing in Syracuse. He went out west. He played in California. He became a manager, made a lot of money in baseball. He played for years and years. So you think, well, that's the end of the story. He moved to a town called Mahady, which is near the Mojave Desert, which is also near where a lot of the mining areas are. And he soon purchased several businesses. And one of the local people there I talked to said he remembers him. He was an old gentleman. He would walk downtown. He knew everybody in town. Well, what happened one day was some of these miners found a silver ore in a mine, and two of them were wealthy and decided to hold on to it because they knew it was going to be valuable. The other two needed money. So I grub-staked them. He gave them $1,500 for the rights to their share of the mine. It became the famous silver mine, and a mining company in South Africa paid them millions and millions of dollars for the rights to this, and it became one of the biggest mines in the United States. So Cy went from losing his daughter, divorced, leaving the East Coast. His share was worth, when he sold it to the South African company, it was worth $1.2 million. And that's equivalent to over 20 million today. And so I've often thought he's probably the only millionaire that used to be a policeman in Cortland. And in 1936, he's about our age, he comes back to Cortland. He wanted to see things. I don't know if he visited the Cortland police. I don't know where it was then. But he visited Cortland and just drove through. I'm sure he had a Cadillac or something, you know, and I don't know if anyone realized just how rich he was. But so that was kind of a happy ending. He turned out to be one of the richest people in America just because he was at the right place at the right time. I keep going the wrong way. Dasher Cox, if you've ever been to Dasher Cox's in Homer, he was the brother of Frank Dasher Cox, the original Dasher Cox. Dasher played for the 1905 Cortland Wagon Makers minor league team. Excellent player, another first baseman, 6 feet tall. His name was Ralph Cox, but for baseball, the Cortland Standard called him Dasher Cox. So you have a Frank Cox, who everyone called Dasher Cox, and his brother, Ralph Cox, everyone called him Dasher Cox. So I don't think we'll ever know the story. He basically he ended up playing in outlaw leagues, and he got blackballed. Major League Baseball didn't like these outlaw leagues. So whenever his team folded, he'd kind of lose a job. So kind of lost track of him in 1908. I don't know whatever happened to him. But they said he had the talent to be a major league player. So that wasn't really a happy ending. Jim Mahady, probably, I don't know if anyone's heard of him. John McGraw in 1921 was aware of Jim Mahady. He was a pretty good local player. He never played minor league ball, so he signed him to the New York Giants. He let Jim Mahady get in one game on October 2nd. Jim Mahady played second base for the New York Giants during an actual major league game. I think he got an assist. One ball was hit to him. He never got the bat, so he's kind of like the gentleman from Field of Dreams.
Moonlight Graham.
Moonlight Graham. He's kind of like the Moonlight Graham. He never got to bat in the majors. After that, he went back to the minors and he tried to become a pitcher. He pitched for a few years. Later, he was convicted. There was a motor vehicle homicide. He was convicted. He was at fault, and he was sent to prison. He played on the prison baseball team, and he died early at the age of 35. So he kind of had a tragic ending. I'm not sure where baseball kind of fit in his life, but
Was he a Cortland native?
he was from Cortland, and he died in Cortland. Next player, Johnny Logan. He was probably the best shortstop who ever played in Cortland. He was from Union Endicott High School. And he was interviewed once, and he said that Dewey Griggs signed him, and because he was still in high school, he couldn't pay him any money. He said, "I'll pay you maybe at the end of the season." But what he did was he gave him cleats because he couldn't afford cleats. And Johnny Logan would get on a Greyhound bus every Sunday in Binghamton, come up to Homer and play for the Homer Braves, and then go back. And he did this while he was in high school, and everyone knew he was a star. Unfortunately, because he played during World War II, there aren't a lot of box scores. I don't know how good he really was, but everyone knew he was probably the best shortstop in the league, even though he was a high school player.
Well, he must have been pretty good because he went on to play for the Milwaukee Braves.
Yep.
Professional team.
Yep. And after World War II, the Milwaukee Braves signed him as a shortstop, and here we go.
Yeah.
Okay, 1954, he's with the Milwaukee Braves. 1957, I was just starting to watch baseball. Milwaukee beat the New York Yankees in the World Series, and he was one of the leaders of the team. He was a great shortstop, great hitter. His last name wasn't actually Logan, L-O-G-A-N. I just assumed he was Irish or English. It's actually L-O-G-I-N, so he was actually Russian. And his family was from Russia, so I thought that was kind of interesting. And then he did get paid by Dewey Griggs for the Homer Braves. He made $5 a game. So I guess probably at the end of the season they gave him some money under the table. And speaking of Dewey Griggs, most of the pictures that I have are when he was older. But what's interesting about Dewey is he was one of two letter carriers in the village of Homer. Dewey had one half of the village, and another letter carrier had the other half. So Dewey probably knew almost everybody in Homer. When the other guy was sick, I'm sure he probably had to take his place. He coached Homer's town teams in the 1930s, and he must have loved being a coach, because in 1939 he formed the Homer Merchants. You're all going to get one of these handouts, which is going to kind of give you a whole capsule of the history of the Homer Braves, Homer Merchants, and how they did. But he was kind of a natural with baseball. He got involved with the Boston Braves at the time, and he became a scout. They moved to Milwaukee. Now they're with Atlanta, and they also agreed to support the local team. The Homer Braves was supported, and what they did was they had uniforms that were donated by the Boston Braves. So they all had Braves on there, and they were somebody's uniform. And I think the Living History Center has one, and that was donated. And you can see it's a certain number, it's a different player that was on the Boston Braves. But what's interesting about him was during World War II, most of the baseball teams and leagues basically disbanded. They didn't survive, and he made sure that there would be baseball in Homer, so he formed his own semi-pro league, and it was called the Southern Tier League, and it had famous teams like the Groton Coronas, a team from Sydney. I think they were called the Sydney Cardinals. I think they were sponsored by the St. Louis Cardinals. There were Binghamton teams, Auburn teams, and other towns. So that league was together for several years. And if you thought he was a good organizer of leagues, he was probably even a better baseball scout. During that 1957 World Series, he signed Hank Aaron, who's now in the Hall of Fame. He signed Johnny Logan, who was the star shortstop. He signed Wes Covington, who was one of the best outfielders. And he also signed Bob Trowbridge, who was a pitcher. So for the World Series champion players, it was all signed by Dewey Griggs. And I've got a picture of him that you're welcome to look at after with Hank Aaron. This was in the Cortland Standard. Unfortunately, I never met him, but his name is still on Griggs Field today. And okay, so And also, if you could just hold questions until the end so that we have some time, because I'm running a little bit behind right now. Okay, this is a horrible picture. Chugger Davis, most of you have heard of him or heard of the football field, so you think Chugger Davis, you think football. Actually, baseball, we've probably been a pretty good rival. He's an interesting character. He got his nickname Chugger because he was born in Missouri, and he had a southern drawl, which was unusual for around Cortland, for some guy with a southern drawl here. And he was the football coach at SUNY Cortland. And whenever they had practices, his favorite expression was, "Keep a chugging there." And so he was always saying that to the players. So one of the players one day started calling him Chugger, and then the whole team started calling him Chugger, and then everybody in town started calling him Chugger. So he became Chugger Davis. Quite an athlete. In college he played football, basketball, and track. He was a track star. I think he also was a boxing champion in grad school. So he was very athletic. He also played shortstop in the minor leagues in the summertime when he wasn't in college. And he was an excellent minor league shortstop. He was moving up the ladder. He was moving up from Class D to C to B. All he had to do was get up to A and then to the major leagues, but at some point he decided he wanted to be an educator and a coach. So he gave up playing baseball. But once he started coaching at SUNY Cortland, he also was playing semi-pro baseball for the Cortland Moose for several years when he was in his 30s. And then from 1943 to 1953, Dewey Griggs signed him to be the player coach of the Homer Braves. So Dewey was pretty sharp. Here he had his manager or coach of the Homer Braves, who also happened to be the baseball coach for SUNY Cortland, so the best players from SUNY Cortland were signed for the Braves. He also had an in with Colgate, so some of the future major league players that went to Colgate were playing for the Homer Braves. And so that was a great combo. And then at the age of 47, he batted .417 for the Homer Braves, even though he's 47 years old. And as a coach, he led them to 6 first-place finishes and 6 championships of their league. And then when I interviewed Don Steger a few years ago, he mentioned that when they would all run out to the field, baseball diamond for the Homer Braves, that Chugger Davis liked to run onto the field and do a backflip, which is kind of like the Ozzie Smith used to do. But he used to do that back then because I guess he was also a gymnast. But he had a winning record in football, winning record in baseball, winning record in basketball, and he also coached the golf team. So that's a little bit about Chugger. Bob Springer, and this is probably the worst picture I have. I have better pictures of him. He was one of the few players back then that wore glasses. He went to Homer High. He also played soccer and baseball for SUNY Cortland. He was a left-handed pitcher, very short. Don Steger said that his fingers were so short that he couldn't really throw a curveball, and that's why he didn't go any further. But he also was an All-American goalkeeper at SUNY Cortland, which is something. And then when he pitched for the Homer Braves, he won 46 games, only lost 15. He went 13-0 in the year 1943. He ended up being signed by the Syracuse Chiefs and was a pitcher for the Syracuse Chiefs, which is one step below the majors. One day he was sliding into second base and he broke his ankle. His baseball career after that was never the same. He just never really recovered from breaking his ankle. And as you all know, he coached at Cincinnati High School for 30 some odd years, but he was an excellent player himself. And then there's John Steger, and he was born in Preble, and he played for George Butts at Homer High School. He was a star with the Homer Merchants, and he played first base again. He was given a tryout with the Syracuse Chiefs, but World War II kind of interrupted it, and he ended up having to go down to Florida to be inducted, or something about the military. So that put a halt to his baseball career for a while. After World War II, Dewey Griggs signed him for a minor league contract with the Boston Braves. So for 3 years, he played first base in the minors in the Midwest, and he married and he raised a family here in Homer. And he came back and he played for the Homer Braves for 4 years, and he batted over 300 every year. He either led the team in home runs or he was second in home runs. And he had trouble hitting the curveball, so he knew he wasn't going to make the majors. The day that his first daughter was born, he got the news, I guess, by phone, and then he had a game that night or later in the day, and he hit a home run to win the game. And his wife mentioned that won the baseball game for the team. So I guess he had quite a day that day. He thinks that the Homer Braves paid him about $15 a game when he played. And back then, hitters didn't get out of the batter's box. They didn't wear helmets. And that television, he's pretty sure, caused the end of the Homer Braves in semi-pro baseball. Okay, Wild Bill Setley, the gentleman on the book. He pitched against Cortland. He pitched the first intentional walk that any of the Cortland players had ever seen. He told the catcher to stand up, move away, 5 feet away from the batter, and I'm going to throw the ball to you. And he threw him 4 balls. It was an intentional walk, and nobody in Cortland had ever heard of that type of play. And one quick story about him, he was umpiring in Pennsylvania in the coal mine region. There were a lot of battles. Everyone used to bet, and the coal miners always bet on the baseball games, the minor league games. So he's the umpire, and he's umpiring the game, and all of a sudden he hears a voice saying, "Hi there, what's the score?" So he looks around, he doesn't see anything, so he goes back to umpiring, and about 30 seconds later, all of a sudden he hears, "Hi there, what's the score?" And now he's kind of curious. He knows he's hearing something, but he doesn't see anyone, so he starts looking around. All of a sudden he looks in the ground, and there's like this little culvert or something, and he sees these 2 eyes, and he sees a helmet. And he looks down and realizes it's a coal miner. And the coal miner has come up from the bottom of the coal mine to find out what the baseball score was. So he goes over, and he goes, "Hi there, what's the score?" He goes, "Well, since you didn't pay admission, you're going to have to leave now, and I'm not going to tell you what the score is." But that's just one of 70 different stories in there. He also, one of my favorite stories was he would peel a potato so it shape it like a baseball, and he would wait a certain time in the game and use the potato, and he'd be tossing over to keep a runner close to the base, and he'd substitute the potato, overthrow the fielder, it would go over his head, the runner would start running, and then he'd take the baseball, run over and tag him out. So it's hard not to want to know more about somebody like that, because I don't think he ever had a day or a week where he had a dull moment. And then I think I will finish with Johnny Gee. I think how many of you ever met Johnny Gee? Okay, I never met him. So 6'9" tall. So we started with the shortest gentleman, John McGraw, and we're finishing with the tallest guy, left-handed pitcher. You can see there how big he was. His catcher for the Homer Braves, Carol Anstead, said that when Johnny Gee was pitching, he said when he finally let go of the ball, he said it was almost like his hand was right in front of the plate. He was so big and so close. He also had a temper. One game with the Homer Braves, Johnny Gee had a no-hitter. It was near the end of the game. They were playing, I think, a Puerto Rican travel team. And one of the batters bunted the ball. Johnny Gee got it and threw it, but the batter beat it, and he lost his no-hitter. And Johnny Gee was fuming. And he waited until the end of the game when the batter came up again. And the catcher knew what he was going to do. He was going to throw the ball at his head. And so the catcher went out to him. He goes, "You're not thinking what I think you're thinking." He goes, "Yeah, I'm thinking of it." So he said to him, "You can't do that. They're going to throw you out, plus we're going to end up in a big fight, this big brawl with this other team. You can't just throw the ball at his head," because he shouldn't have bunted. So Johnny Gee listened to his catcher and didn't beat him, but I'm sure he probably get back at him some other way. But what was interesting is most of you think of him as a principal, but basically he was, you know, a superstar athlete back then. Grew up in Syracuse. He played for the University of Michigan basketball. He was a star. He was the center, probably one of the tallest centers in the country. He also pitched for the University of Michigan. He struck out 21 batters one game. I'm sure everyone was kind of intimidated when they saw him. He probably was pretty wild. He went on to play professional basketball with the Syracuse Nationals of the NBL, which was before they became the NBA, and he was a center. He was a pretty good player. And he also was signed by Pittsburgh after he won 20 games for the Syracuse Chiefs. But what happened was he started getting arm trouble. I think nowadays doctors and trainers could probably have kept a 6'9" fella from getting arm trouble. He kept hurting his arm. Throughout following his career, he always had arm trouble, even with the Homer Braves, which was too bad, because he was a dominant pitcher. So he pitched for the Pittsburgh Pirates and a few other major league teams, but he never really went that far. But when he got to the Homer Braves, and also before I get to that, they called him the $75,000 lemon, because Pittsburgh gave Syracuse $75,000 plus 4 players just to get Johnny Gee. And that was a lot of money back then, and they gave up 4 prospects just to get him, and he never really panned out for Pittsburgh. But anyways, his career with the Homer Braves, he won 60 games and only lost 16. He struck out 200 batters or more 3 consecutive seasons. He had 20 shutouts. His total career strikeouts for the Homer Braves were 862. Basically what Homer got was a major league pitcher, left-handed, and what Don Steger said was Griggs Field had a short right field, so if you're a left-handed batter, it would be very easy to hit a home run. It's kind of like a Little League field, like there is there now. But left field was almost 500 feet. Nobody ever got it over the fence in left field because of the way the street was made. So having a left-handed pitcher like him and Bob Springer was perfect, because then the lefties couldn't hit him. So he was dominant. He had a lot of battles with Duke Erickson. They had a 22-inning shutout. Each pitcher pitched 22 innings, didn't give up any runs. The game lasted several hours, and Duke Erickson said that he never had arm trouble after that. I don't think Johnny Gee probably had arm trouble after that, but it was probably already because of what he was doing. I think also trying to play basketball and baseball was too much. So he went on to become a principal. I think he was an athletic director for Waterloo, but tremendous player, and the fact that the local semi-pro team had a guy like that pitching for them, you know, it was no wonder that everyone went to see the Homer Braves. They would get almost 3,000 people at Griggs Field to see one of their games. Mm-hmm. And they would play a lot of top semi-pro teams. So I'm going to stop right now, and if anyone has any questions, and also I'm going to pass these out on the Homer Braves. Thank you.
You didn't mention Willie Mays.
Willie Mays, I don't think he ever played here. If you have information, he did. You're right. I'm sorry. Johnny Gee pitched against Willie Mays, and I think he had a home run. Willie Mays had a home run off Johnny Gee. And Willie Mays' team beat Johnny Gee. I was thinking of and there was a picture of the Cortland police with yeah. And if anyone has any questions or questions on the book.
Tony, where do you find all your information? Is it just an ongoing thing?
It's an ongoing thing, interlibrary loan. Nowadays, with the internet, you can find out a lot. Old Fulton Postcards has a lot, particularly for like the Homer Braves. But if you really want to do a little research on, I'll use that team as an example, you have to look like Syracuse papers, local papers, maybe an Auburn paper. And so sometimes back then it was kind of hard to get information, and you'd be kind of upset, like especially like at holiday, the local newspapers they just wouldn't cover a baseball game because it was a holiday and nobody went. And you'd sit there and think, that's the game I needed to find and I can't. So, but it's kind of fascinating, like with Wild Bill Setley, I think I probably looked at 50 to 75 newspapers all over, because he umpired in different leagues, then there were different towns. And his relatives are always sending me copies of things out of newspapers. You know, did you see this one? Did you see that one?
I was thinking about him in particular with the little stories. I mean, are they in newspapers sometimes,
Yeah.
or are they family remembrances, or
See,
both?
what made him unique was back then they would just cover the game. They didn't interview the players. There wasn't TV. There was no ESPN highlights. So everything was in the newspaper, but the reporters never really talked to the players except for him. He would always say things about, he said he was born in Missouri right next to Jesse James, and Jesse James taught him how to shoot a pistol. And he was born in New Jersey. And so everyone, that's how he got kind of like the nickname Wild Bill. They thought he was from Missouri and he was a gunslinger. He just made up the story, the spur of the moment. So, but they actually would say that in the paper about him. That's, again, he was way ahead of his time. You know, had he been born nowadays, he'd be a millionaire, a billionaire, because he was just a born entertainer. And, but
Were you by any chance interested in baseball early enough in your research that you're doing here to have had first-person interviews with family members that were close to when these people were
I interviewed
available?
Duke Erickson.
Duke Erickson's daughter.
Yeah.
I was at that game, 22 inning game, September 20th, 1948.
Yeah.
I was there. It was amazing. But my dad was pitching. And
So he was busy.
by the way, it was called because of darkness. And so they had to play against each other the following Wednesday because
Yeah.
Homer's the only one that had lights. And they had to play under the lights the following Wednesday, and
Yeah.
Groton beat Homer that night.
Yeah, that's.
That's a wonderful.
Is Bob Springer still alive?
He is not.
No.
His wife is at the
Brewster.
Brewster House, and my wife is a relative of hers, so we met her, I think it was a year or two ago. And if she's still there, she would welcome, and she's welcome, you know, you to go and see her. She's very lucid, and she's happy to see people. And she told me that his family actually owned a farm right where the Cortland Country Club was, which I thought was kind of interesting. There was like a Springer farm right there, and then the country club, I guess, bought the acreage.
You mentioned that he had problems with the curveball. He learned to pitch a very slow curve, which he carried on as a coach and taught every pitcher, I swear, in Cincinnati how to throw that pitch.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me because, you know, he was a very smart gentleman. And I mean, I'd like to know more about his goalkeeper career because my son was a goalkeeper, and Bob Springer, I think, was like 5'6", 5'7", 5'8".
Yes.
He's always the shortest one on a team, and usually a goalkeeper you want someone a little bit taller, cover a big area.
His teams were always, from a soccer standpoint, you know, right there at the top.
Yeah.
And if you watch currently, you're seeing the Cincinnati's team always playing for sectional championships, and you know, they're always right there. That's tradition stayed there in Cincinnati's.
Yeah.
For the early baseball teams, it appears that a lot of the travel was railroad. Is that how
Yep.
they must have gotten places? Because
Because
I found my grandfather umpiring in Auburn. Like, and I'm trying to think of that was their only, I assume Sundays was the only day off that most of these guys had, if they worked in factories. But to be in Auburn to umpire a game and then back in Cortland on Monday to work, in 1890, 1899,
Yeah, what was his name?
Ira, that's Ira Dexter.
Okay,
I
okay.
see his name
Yeah.
pop up in Auburn and stuff quite a
He,
bit.
he was a minor league umpire, and he, I think because he had a family, he didn't really get into professional baseball more. I mean, he probably could have had a career as a minor league umpire, very easy. And, but yeah, they would go all over, and they would have special trains for the baseball games, and fans would go from one town to the other on the train. And Sunday ball playing was very difficult because it was against the law. So most towns you couldn't play baseball on Sunday. But in towns where you could, or what they would do is they would play off in some island right outside the city limits. And you weren't allowed to charge admission because the players would all get arrested. So what they would do is you would have to like donate money for something. So that way it wasn't an actual game, even though it was an actual game. You know, it's a whole history of that. Couldn't play baseball on Sunday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have you been able to plot or know for a fact the original baseball fields in the city of Cortland?
Yep.
Just happen to have. I was always to the belief that there was a baseball field by the early fairgrounds that we know about, and one on the south side of Fort Washington Street, Rambler Field.
Rambler Field, yep. Leonard Ralston from SUNY Cortland gave me a copy of this picture. This was what was called athletic field, and it's near where Meldrum Field is today. You can see all the writing from the different businesses on the
billboards.
fence, the billboards. That was for the minor league team to support. They paid advertising. SUNY Cortland football was using this the day they took this picture. The minor league team played there from 1899 to 1901, and then also in 1905. And then when they gave up, SUNY Cortland played there, I don't know how long, and then eventually it was houses built between South Main Street and where Meldrum Field is. So I thought that was interesting. You can see there's a church steeple on Church Street as to where it was. But that was one field. There was also let's see if I have a picture of the Homer played, where Homer Academy was. They played behind there. There was a baseball field there for the Homer Town team. And so I substitute teach something now at the Homer Elementary School, and I look around at their playground area and girls softball field there, and I look at that and I think, there used to be some great baseball games here, and John McGraw pitched right here.
Well, I'm thinking there's a cemetery there too.
There was a cemetery behind there too, but
Yeah.
it was way back,
Yeah.
way back. It was across the street from the flower, what's it, Arnold's Flowers?
Yeah.
It's not Arnold's, is it? Is it Arnold's?
Arnold's.
Okay.
And then there's the field in Groton, which I finally visited. I think it was within the last year. Actually, I went and saw it. I thought it was kind of funny, but
It's interesting to see the people in the crowd,
yeah,
how they look today.
and the Groton had a tremendous team. They were actually the state semi-pro champs one year, and they went to play in the national championship, the Groton Coronas. And I don't think they won, but I mean the fact that they won the state semi-pro championship just shows you how big that team was.
1914.
Yeah.
They did dress differently in the crowd.
Yeah.
They were
It was
all,
an event.
they were all dressed up with hats and
Straw hats
jackets
and,
and white shirts and.
yeah, the women all looked like they were going to a play or
Sunday best.
something. Well, thank
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, very informative.